We are in the COVID storm in New York City. Where else will it hit and how badly? Are some of these models perhaps overstating what's going to happen in other parts of the country? We'll address that. And also, how do we reopen America? The second front of this two-front war needs more administration attention. We'll get into the political fight over chloroquine not being a quarantine neighborhood tattletale. And also, where does Joe Biden think he is? That and more coming up.
We have to open our country up. We have to get going. We have to open our country up. No country was designed for this. Will you close it? We're in the midst of the greatest economic boom in history for any country. Our country had the greatest economic boom in history. We had the most people working that we've ever had, almost 160 million people. And then from 160 million, they want nobody to leave their house. You know, you could use the term cold turkey, right? That's called cold turkey. A country's not designed, this country is not designed for that. We have to get our country back. And I think it's going to come back, and I hope it's going to come back very quickly.
Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Wow, we are now weeks deep into this fight against COVID-19. We are doing everything that we can as a country, as a nation, as individuals, all the way up and down, to try and get a handle on this situation. The president, though, beginning what I think is a very necessary part of a shift in focus from not just, remember, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. This is not taking away from one. This is just opening up another part of our mission set as a nation, which is to make sure the economy keeps going. Because as we all know, the ramifications of a collapsed economy over the long term, it's misery and despair and loss of health and loss of life, the likes of which we can't even really fathom. I think most people do understand that, at least certainly everybody working very hard with the administration right now in the White House, the advisors around it. There's a recognition of this. But we are going to have to work hard to strike a balance here. There's been more attention placed by the president on the possibility of a second task force looking at economic reopening, because we need to do it. I don't know what the timeline is, but we do. Everyone agrees that we need to do this thing. But well, I shouldn't say everybody. It seems like almost everybody agrees with that. But there's still this anger that pops up. The moment that you say we've got to get back to work, there's a whole they're quite vicious, actually. There's a virtue signaling statist leftist contingent that views any talk at all about the economy as somehow a corporate special interest thing, or they don't understand or they don't care about what I'm seeing this weekend. I walked around New York City to take as much of a look as I could at what's going on here. I had a mask on. I had gloves on. I'm doing the precautions, but I have to walk the dog. And so I was walking around empty streets. I mean, you can walk through Times Square right now at a time of year. It's early springtime. Usually there would be thousands and thousands of people packed in there. And as we know, because of what we're facing right now, it is largely, almost entirely empty. You also have the changes that you see in basic day-to-day life for people, including now every store that I see. There were some that were slow to adopt this, but not only are they limiting the number of people who can go in over the last I'd say week or so, they've really ramped this up. You now have to stand at hash marks that they painted on the street outside the store, separated by 6 feet or so that nobody has to be concerned about waiting in line and catching COVID-19. My friends, at what point does this start to look like we're actually doing things that are either not necessary or even counterproductive? We have to be able to have this discussion. We have this discussion about all other aspects of national and political life. And this movement to shut down any debate from those who seem to think that there is clarity from the experts. The experts are advising They do not have answers. That is a fact. They do not have answers about how quickly the economy can reopen. They do not have answers about when we will be through this. They do not have answers about whether or not we will face a second wave in the fall. And I understand right now the primary focus is keeping our hospitals from being overwhelmed. I'm watching this data from the IHME. This is the data that everyone is so focused on all the time. I'm watching the data, and it is consistently wrong in overestimating. Now, you say this, they're overestimating hospitalizations, they're overestimating fatalities state by state again and again, and people look at you and they say, are you minimizing the horrible loss of life? No, people who are questioning what's going on here want to make sure that we are making sound decisions about resources and about policy for something that is already painful for the American people and could become catastrophic over time. In fact, there's a certainty that the United States economy, if we try to do this, let's say, until a vaccine comes, and there are some people who are advocating for, if not that, something pretty close to it, we would not be the same country after that vaccine. We would be dramatically less free, less well off as individuals, less healthy, less prosperous. So we know that there has to be something in the middle here. There has to be some place that we can go in between complete lockdown for 18 months and, okay, everybody, no big deal. We're just going to go back to work tomorrow. No one is saying that. That's a straw man. And that's a very annoying tendency that I'm seeing among particularly a lot of journalists who still have jobs, who haven't figured out yet that their jobs will go away in a matter of a few months because the advertising revenues from the businesses that are the support model for all media are getting crushed right now. There are a lot of people that write for these websites and think that they're just paid. They're paid to produce content that mirrors a lot of the other content you'll see, especially because, the news media is 90% plus liberal. So, BuzzFeed is writing on the same stuff that HuffPost is writing on the same stuff that Salon is writing on the same stuff that Vox. You look at all these different sites. And it's true of conservative media as well, by the way. We're all going to be suffering here dramatically, economically. And there's already furloughs. There's already some layoffs that have taken place, mostly furloughs from what I've seen, mandatory pay cuts or voluntary pay cuts, but they're really mandatory. And they can call them whatever they want. All of that is going on right now, and it's only going to get worse. We don't have the luxury of endless time to figure this out. We need a plan. Everyone was saying we didn't anticipate COVID-19 well enough. I think that's true. The experts let us down there, I would note. I could make the case all day long. The experts have absolutely let us down. So now we're turning to the experts. And it's not in bad faith. I think they did their best. I think that they looked at the data coming out of China, and that was the only data they had. And they don't come from a perspective of being somebody who deals with the lies of the Chinese government on a regular basis, so they were too quick to believe it. But there is this elevation of epidemiological experts within the upper reaches of government, of the federal bureaucracy. There's an elevation of them into something like priest status now, where we must listen to them. To question anything is to not care about all the death and destruction that's going on around us. And it's terrible right here in New York. And I'm very aware of it. I'm aware of it not just when I read the really gut-punching numbers about all the people that are dying in hospitals, particularly in Brooklyn and Queens, but also when you just try to live your day-to-day life here. We are all under effectively a form of self-imposed house arrest. That is what is going on. You're able to leave the apartment, but for a short duration, and have very minimal human contact when you go outside. Why should this be the case all across the country? There are a lot of questions that need answering here. And that's one of the things that I want to do today. I want to start these dialogues. I want to get these discussions going now. Because I know that the people that currently are being left in charge of the decision making, they're under so much pressure to adhere to a false principle, which is that there is no concern here for the government beyond maximum resources and maximum lockdown in order to fight against this virus and save every individual life that can happen. They are doing that. That's an important principle. It's not the only principle. And this has been a discussion that has really been put aside because people have been they've really been morally blackmailed into, if you think that tens of millions of people losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods, losing their life savings in response to what the experts say are models and tactics that are not to be questioned, you're a bad person. This is what this has turned into. We know it's going to be much more interesting down the line when we look back at some of the tracing and investigations about how this disease spread. We'll have much better sense of what really happened. Right now, we're just, after weeks of the government saying don't panic, we're in the midst of a massive panic response. Shutting down everything and having people want to shut down every state equally across the country and not have an end date in mind and not be willing to even discuss how we reopen the economy and not look at the way we can introduce mitigation measures that also allow for more and more business to be open and for people to start to live their lives again. This is the change that needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. I know we're in the midst of this. I understand that it's as bad right now. In the next week or so, they're saying it's as bad as it's going to be at any point. All right. Why would we wait until the worst part of this storm passes before we have a plan? Why can't we have a discussion now about how, all right, the target is, when deaths and new cases and hospitalizations, people in the ICU beds, when they're at this number in this place, we will do the following. We will try the following measures and we will adjust as needed. Why wouldn't it be a state by state basis? It makes no sense to think that New York City and Wyoming should be on the same plan here. Social distancing is built into the way of life for a lot of people across the country before they even knew it was social distancing. This is why this media fixation on crunching the data right now, crunching the numbers from cell phone GPS tracking to show that there are parts of out west and in the south where there's a lot more travel going on than there is in the industrial Midwest, the Northeast, really the coasts, and the area in and around Detroit and Chicago. Well, this is an urbanization versus rural life, or urban versus rural life issue largely. And all the data that we have, and why is New York so much worse than Los Angeles? The only real answer you have is a crowd density issue. That's the only thing anyone's come up with. Los Angeles also has a lot of international flights. Los Angeles had many people coming in, traveling in from the hotspot in China of Wuhan. New York has much more close density, not just in, people think of close density in travel. What they need to understand about why New York is different, and this is a thing that I know very well as someone who has lived in incredibly cramped quarters with many roommates. And, I had, we had a family of 6 growing up living in an apartment that, my 2 brothers and I shared one room. I mean, this is normal. So there are 3 of us in one bedroom. I mean, this is normal in New York. And that changes very much the transmission rates. And I'm just basing it on what the experts tell us. Close quarters, close and continuing contact, actual physical contact with other human beings is a major vector for spread of this disease. It's a very important indicator of how much it'll spread. That is much more common here in New York than it is in other places. So look, I know there's a lot of things that are all happening here at the same time, but we need to have the discussion about getting America going and opening up now. That doesn't mean we have to open it up now, but we have to be able to talk about this. And I've really lost patience with this movement of just shut it down, shut everything down as long as the experts tell us. We can't do that forever. We have to start from that. We cannot. In fact, it would be wrong to do that forever. Or until when I say forever, until we get a vaccine, which is at least 18 months away, my friends, the vaccines might not even work. We have to establish a way of living life and going forward as a society without a silver bullet for this. Now, I'm going to talk about chloroquine. I'm going to talk about treatments. Treatments, I think, are going to be a major part of getting us back to a greater degree of normalcy. And we'll discuss I spent so much time this weekend reading up on where they are and where all of that stands. But the discussion needs to happen now. We cannot be silenced by people who think they are listening to the experts, but actually they're giving into panic because they won't listen to anything else about the other parts of life that also do matter somewhat. That there is an importance to letting people feed themselves, letting people produce, letting people go about the business of America. And that should be a discussion that we can have while we're also trying to save as many of our fellow Americans as possible and do everything that we can with the resources that we have. Those resources, by the way, are dependent upon the economy that we have. So the fight, just as it would be in a war, and we use the war analogy to get ourselves fired up, but then you start to think of, okay, industrial production, commercial activity. Why did we win World War II? Yeah, sure, we had incredibly brave men in uniform who won that war for us. But if we had sent them to fight the Japanese and the Nazis without the tanks and the planes, and it wouldn't have gone very well, right? We understand these things are linked. And we understand that it's time for us to have a real discussion about the strategy for America going forward. The president said it this weekend. We need to keep looking at it. How do we reopen? What does it look like? That needs to be thought about honestly and intensely now.
Obviously we know anyone can spread the disease, all right, unwittingly.
Right.
So why even not have a few businesses open? Why not just shut everything down? There are grocery stores that are open, fast food places. Why even take a little chance? Just shut it all down temporarily.
We'll answer that question later. All I can say is that right now things are looking really good, and opening up with a bang will be a great thing, and there's nobody going to be happier than me.
Why not shut everything down, including places where you need food? Including the places that sell you the milk and the bread and the meat and the stuff for your family and yourself. Why not shut that down too? Now, there's a part of me that just wants to do what everyone's been doing, saying that was a reporter in a briefing by the White House task force effectively saying, why take any risk? Now, see, this is what we've gone to now. This has become a more common mindset that we want to admit, that we'll take no risks. This is the mindset of people die driving. We shut down all the highways indefinitely until we find perfectly safe driving. That is happening now. There is a mindset that is growing. That's not how we live our lives. It is not how we live our lives dealing with any other disease or any other risk that is out there. Life is all about looking at risks and making choices. There is no risk-free existence worth living. When people start to say, when journalists, when those who have platforms and are supposed to be informing us, why not just shut down everything? Well, for how long? People will last at least a few weeks without any food. Do we just see how long before people start being at risk of starvation? How could someone ask such a stupid question? Well, it's because it's reflective of a mindset that whatever the experts tell us, we should just do, not question, even if it means shut down everything, including grocery stores and pharmacies that give people necessary medicine to keep them alive. I'm just wondering, what costs are some people on the left, in the media, not willing to pay to fight COVID? Is there anything that they're not willing to do?
But I'm worried that if we see in the news presentations of single cases as heralded being something that I have never seen before, this is so horrible, that's the worst case of severe respiratory distress syndrome that I have seen, we are falling into a trap of sensationalism. I mean, can you imagine what would have happened if 60 million deaths that happen every year in this planet, we had a meter counting them one by one and having stories written for each one of them? It would be horrible. I mean, we have gone into a complete panic state, measuring so far a sizable number of deaths, but nothing close to the total cumulative mortality that we see both in this country and around this world.
So that's Professor Ioannidis, who is at Stanford Medical School, is an epidemiologist, world-class epidemiologist, based on all the stuff that you can read about him online. And he's saying we're giving into panic here, that this has gotten to be not helpful. This is too far. That all of these news stories, and you keep seeing this happening. There'll be a news story. A healthy 40-year-old dies, and then they talk about the family, and it's terrible, right? Every death is terrible. But then you read deeper into it and you find, okay, well, the healthy 40-year-old, and then the news media keeps doing this because they know everyone's going to click on it because we've been told that there's higher risk factors for certain people. Now, that doesn't change how much we care about defending anyone. It's just a question of how can we assess the measures necessary? We need to protect vulnerable populations, and that's going to continue for a long time. But what do we do with the much less vulnerable population that has to go about economic activity, just activity in general, in order to give the best possible chance to defeat this virus and let all people breathe more easily in the shortest possible time so that we don't have to keep worrying about this, including our particularly vulnerable populations? But you see this news story and they'll say healthy 40-year-old dies, and then you'll click in it. And this, I've done this so many times now that I don't even click it on anymore. And you'll look down a little bit and it'll say, well, he actually, he had, type 2 diabetes and had asthma. And you say, okay, now that's a life just like every other life that's being lost here. It's precious. This person has loved ones, and it's a loss that shouldn't have happened, right? We all think we should have been able to stop this from happening. All right, but why did the media like to run the story of somebody who's healthy 40-year-old? When you click on it, it's no. This is another person who is at high risk. We lost another brother. We lost another sister here, who's from the high risk population. But why misrepresent that? Because everyone's panicking, and everyone will click right away. It's even worse than I thought. That's the mentality that the media keeps going for. It's even worse than I thought, and they're exploiting this. And to people who say, well, they get into this really marinating deeply in all the disturbing emotions here and the sadness and the agony of losing our fellow Americans. Are they indicating that is there something that's more sad about someone dying from COVID-19 than another individual of the same age with a family and kids, or it's a single person? It doesn't matter. It's a human life, right? A person who dies of heart disease is one of these things more, because it seems like there's now an elevation of this, of the deaths. And this is what Dr. Ioannidis is saying here. There's an elevation of this that's occurring for purposes that are not helpful, except to get a lot of clicks for the media and to drive a panic narrative. And I think increasingly, and this is a little early in this phase, but we will see more of it. It'll become more apparent, and I'll probably have to replay this clip for you in about 2 months, that there will be people who, no matter what the reality is here of all the numbers, the death toll, hospitalizations, they will be very invested in the story that this was the most horrific thing to happen in 100 years and that it's all Donald Trump's fault. This will be politicized grotesquely. You have to remember that the media ran with the lie of Russia collusion during a time of unbelievable American prosperity and peace, and things were going great. And we heard all day long about something that wasn't even a real story. What do you think they're going to do with this? You think they're going to report on this in a neutral fashion and be fair-minded about what the response has really been and how we have done? It'd be one thing if America was suffering through this and other countries were, just fine. Spain, Italy, China. I mean, we're going to see more and more countries that have been hit hard by this. And yes, it's a tragedy. It's terrible. But if you're going to look at the response and we're going to gauge the response, that means that we have to be able to take some looks at the numbers and do some calculations about, okay, what did they say was going to happen versus what did happen? And Professor Ioannidis is just saying we got to stop. We have to stop with this. Every single death gets reported on as if this is indicative of what's going to happen to all of us. I'm seeing the term, the terms used around about how this is fear exploitation, and it absolutely is. Here is on the numbers, and this is also necessary if we're going to look at where the numbers are right now and what they've said they would be. What you'll find is that they're overstated. They're overstated in terms of hospitalizations and deaths for where we are now, using models that are a week or two old. And they're not overstated by, look, if they said that there would be a number of deaths that were, let's say they got it just a little bit wrong, I would say, all right, I mean, the models are working pretty well, folks. We got to pay close attention to it. The IMHE model for coronavirus, for COVID-19, that is the primary model the White House is relying on. People are saying that it's using New York, New Jersey data and then extrapolating into the rest of the country, which doesn't make any sense. I don't know if that's true because they won't explain it. The White House won't explain it. But here's what we do know. The model predicted 121,000 Americans would be hospitalized yesterday because of COVID-19. The actual number is 31,000. Now, that's a lot of people, and that's really serious. And, I get a little annoyed that we have to keep saying every life is precious. And of course, every life is precious. You wouldn't be listening to this show if you didn't think that I came from the perspective of being a moral and decent person who wants every human being who can be saved to be saved. Of course I do. But can we look at the numbers and then say, well, hold on a second. If we're making determinations about equipment, materiel, medical personnel, based upon models that are off by a factor of 4, and they're not trying to predict 6 months from now, they're trying to predict week to week. Isn't that important? Shouldn't that get our attention? Why do I get shouted down? Why do I get yelled at by blue checks on social media for just saying, hey guys, the model that they used a week ago is off by a factor of 4. Maybe we should reevaluate some of these models and some of the decisions we're making based upon them. And then it's you don't care if grandma, if grandma's lungs fail and she painfully dies. That's what they say to you. And it's disgusting, and I'm sick of it. And it's very tough not to see a political divide happening here where it's much easier. The psychology of the anti-Trump left is set in a way that they would rather see a continued shutdown of the economy and continued, the rooting against America phenomenon. It's getting harder and harder to feel like that's not a very real thing for the left here. Because what have they been saying for years while Trump is president? He's a clear and present danger. He's a threat to our democracy. And we're going to talk more about Biden, who legitimately, I mean, it seems like this guy is just not well enough for this mentally. It does seem like that based on what he says. And I'm not the only one who's saying it. There are a lot of people, including people that are not even a little bit Trump supporters, who are saying that. And Democrats were saying it 6, 7, 8 months ago. Now they're pretending that they never did. But we have to look at the data. If the data is going to be used to make determinations about our lives, to tell us that we have to stay under house arrest for weeks, perhaps months, I want to be able to discuss that data and ask people to explain why we should do this. Look, they keep telling us that the lockdowns work. Well, is it the lockdowns or is it the mitigation steps that's carrying a majority of that burden of bringing the curve down? How much better off are we just from people? How much better do we have? Here's the question that I can't get an answer from, and I bring it up, and I keep getting yelled at, and I get sick of it, but I think it's clear that it's important. How much better off are we with what is in all but 8 states under a total lockdown order and a cessation of most economic activity? How much better off are we with that than we would be if we said social distancing, mask and gloves, vulnerable populations protected, work from home if you can, but if you can't work from home and you're not in a high risk category and you don't have somebody who's in a high risk category in the home, person by person, we could start to think, I'm not saying that's the right move, but why can I not get an answer about that from anyone? We're being told, do this or else. Get on board or you're a bad person. That's where this is. I'm sorry, I don't accept that, especially when we see an enlargement of state authority and prerogatives that is stunning under any other circumstance. I know this is an emergency, but there are limits to what they should be doing in an emergency, too. We'll get into the COVID-19 neighborhood tattletale association that's been going on with there's crazy stories about what they're not letting people do and what people are getting fined for. We'll get into all of that. But I want to bring us back to more of what the professor has to say about these numbers. And if he's wrong, okay, where are the experts explaining that he's wrong instead of just saying, no, they want to save lives and anyone who doesn't do what they say doesn't? That's not an argument. That's moral blackmail.
I think that there's a very high chance that we are exaggerating. As we discussed, many of the features of this pandemic, of course, they're serious, but I think that the estimates are exaggerated. And I think that there's a risk of really making some fundamental decisions about the structure of our civilization, of our society, of our future that may not be appropriate. I think that we have no clue how a society would work if you need to build it around a construct where everything is done from a distance. So there are some models that suggest that if you go down that path of basically lockdown, you may need to wait for 18 months. And I'm extremely worried about that scenario. I'm not sure that our world, our civilization could survive that.
18 months. Now you got a guy who's a world-class expert in epidemiology from Stanford University who's saying that there are people who think that the way to deal with this is just lockdown for 18 months. That's unacceptable. We cannot do that. That cannot be the answer. This goes back to President Trump. The cure cannot be worse than the disease. There are limits to what we can do to fight against this. And for people who want to say, if it saves just one life, how many lives are they willing to lose from people who are locked in their homes and become suicidally depressed, overdose on drugs, don't have access to routine medical care that would prevent them from dying from other diseases? I mean, where are the limits here? And if you're asking me, well, Buck, what information do we have that these models are incorrect? It's all over the place. It's all over the place. Remember, we went from, in a very brief period, the president talking about 15 days to slow the spread, and then maybe we're going to start loosening some of these shutdown measures. That doesn't mean no person-to-person mitigation. It just means we went from that to, oh no, you're a monster unless you just go for indefinite shutdown. Shut it down, shut it all down. Look what's going on in New York. I'm in New York. New York is different. It's a very unique place that in many ways is absolutely fantastic, and I love it, and this is my hometown. But unfortunately, when you're talking about a crowd disease, which is what this is, just like measles and chickenpox, these are called crowd diseases because the spread happens human to human and density really matters. New York is like a petri dish for crowd diseases. We have close quarters living and close quarters travel and close quarters commerce all the time here. You know, there is no world in which you live in the 5 boroughs of New York City and you're not really dealing with people and you don't have to be up close with them. And, you know, you are smelling people's breath every morning on the subway. You know what they had for breakfast. That is the reality of living here. For a lot of you, you're like, yeah, that's not my reality. I know, which is why New York is different, which is why we can't be making projections for the whole country based on what's going on here. And I am intimately familiar with just how brutal it is here. I have friends who are frontline medical personnel. I'm talking to them on a regular basis. I have friends who are business owners here. They're shut down. You know, I understand that there's a lot going on here. I understand there's a lot of pain in the city and there's a lot of fear. And I'm having to live with that myself. I don't want my fellow American to suffer more than they have to because the policy community is in a panic, in part driven by those who want to see this country failing as long as they can blame Trump for it. That's a real thing that's happening. I'm not saying everyone. I think a lot of people that are engaged in this view it through a non-political lens. That's there too. There's no question. But there's a loud minority here that sees the most important part of this as making sure that Trump is politically suffering from this. He deserves that. They really believe that. He has blood on his hands. That's what they say. Meanwhile, I'll never forget, even back before all this looked nearly as bad on the Bill Maher show, I said, don't you believe, I said this to Bill and his panel, they're asking me to assess Trump's response to this before we had a single U.S. fatality. So I'm like, I don't know, how are we gauging what hasn't happened yet? But I said, wouldn't you agree that Trump doesn't want a single fatality from this on U.S. soil because it's in his interest, whether you think he's moral or not, it's in his interest, and they wouldn't concede that. No, they really think that Trump's a monster. See, the problem is you and I approach this as normal people, like, well, how do we view this as adults who want the best for the most amount of Americans, want to protect life, want to protect our way of life, and want to get this country back up and running, get us back up on our feet. Not hide. We don't have a national bunker to all hide in from this virus. We can't do that indefinitely. And there are other people that, unfortunately, have become so hardwired to view the most important thing in life to be Trump opposition that it's very difficult to have an open and honest conversation with them about what's going on in the country right now without being shouted down, without being told that you're, covering for Trump or you're being a toady or whatever. No, I want what's best for all Americans. Democrat, Republican, independent, anarchist. I don't even care. I want us all to be in a better place. I'm trying to fight for that.